Hello and welcome to the Epilepsy Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dr. Luke Tomich, and I'm a neurosurgeon living and working in New Jersey with a specialty in complex epilepsy.
And I'm your other co-host, Pradeep Joseph, a fourth-year medical student at Rutgers New Jersey Medical School, planning a career in neurosurgery. This is a podcast for patients with epilepsy, for their loved ones and friends, and for all those who want to learn about the challenges of living with epilepsy, about new scientific discoveries in the field, and about emerging medical and surgical treatments. I also hope this podcast will serve as a useful instructional resource for fellow medical students, for residents and attendings, including primary care physicians, epileptologists, and neurosurgeons, all of whom will encounter and treat patients with epilepsy.
Together, we started this podcast with the mission in mind. Knowledge is power, and a patient with epilepsy who knows more about their condition is in a better position to advocate for himself or herself in what has become an increasingly complex, confusing, and fragmented healthcare environment. The truth is, despite the significant technological and scientific gains of the last several years, the medical community in many respects has failed patients with epilepsy, and the numbers will shock you.
Epilepsy is the third most common neurological ailment affecting about 50 million people globally and more than 3 million Americans. And while it's hard to believe, more Americans die each year from complications of epilepsy and sudden unexpected death in epilepsy, also called SUDEP, than die from breast cancer each year. A European study from Dr. Christina Malmgren and others in its May 2003 edition of Epilepsia sought to characterize the provision of epilepsy care throughout Europe and concluded, quote, "Many patients are treated by physicians with a limited knowledge of epilepsy and without the multi-professional resources offered by an epilepsy team. Lack of comprehensive care, lack of epilepsy specialists, as well as lack of knowledge of epilepsy within the medical profession are all among the major problems," end quote. And these same problems exist right here in the U.S.
Access to specialty care is limited. The newest anti-seizure medications can be prohibitively expensive. Comorbidities of epilepsy like depression, anxiety, and memory problems are often neglected. And the complexity of care can overwhelm the ability of specialists to coordinate appropriate surgery. In fact, epilepsy surgery remains one of the most profoundly underutilized interventions in modern medicine. Some studies suggest that a tiny fraction of patients who could be cured or significantly helped by surgery will ever even hear about, much less undergo an operation. And when they finally do decide to undergo surgery, the wait time can be as long as 20 years. Almost every week in my practice in New Jersey, I encounter patients who are being considered for surgery, and they ask me, "I've had these seizures for so many years. Why is it until now no one told me that surgery could be an option?" And I don't know exactly what to tell them. The answer is complex and continues to elude me.
But despite all these problems in the provision of care for patients living with epilepsy, there is reason for real hope. As scientists learn more about how the brain works, about what happens when parts of the brain misbehave to cause seizures, it allows us to innovate like never before. New drugs and pharmaceuticals, implantable devices, seizure detection paradigms, and new surgeries using robotics and precision lasers continue to make this one of the fastest moving and most interesting fields in neuroscience.
Over the course of the next several months, we will interview epileptologists, surgeons, neuropsychologists, and other experts. We'll talk about new surgeries like deep brain stimulation and novel medical therapies like CBD, but also hear about how changes in your diet, exercise, stress management, and even listening to Mozart might have positive effects on your brain function and modulate seizure burden. We'll also hear from patients with epilepsy about how they've lived with epilepsy and thrived despite having seizures. We'll explore the special challenge of driving, dating, and working with epilepsy. And we'll hear about surgical journeys, the good, the bad, and everything in between. All of us surgeons love to tell you about triumphs and successes, the times we hit so-called home runs. And you'll hear about some of those. But I also think it's important to be honest about times surgery leads to complications, times the surgery doesn't help as much as we had hoped, and the unfortunate times that it leads to new problems like difficulty with language, memory, or vision.
We'll strive to provide an unfiltered view into this fascinating corner of neurology and medicine. It's what we owe our patients, and as health professionals, confronting the truth, even when inconvenient, is the only way we learn and improve. So join us, share this podcast with friends, and send questions and ideas for topics. You can reach us at theepilepsypodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.